الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم. Alhamdulillah, today on the 18th of Sha'ban in the year 1443 AH, we have gathered for a new recording and we will be talking about the high-ranking scholar, the great Hanbali faqih and Imam, Al-Qadi Abu Ya Al-Farra. And today with us is Shaikh Abu Ja'far Al-Hanbali. Welcome and Assalamu alaikum, ya Shaykh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Alhamdulillah, it's great to have you here again with us. And inshallah, I want to ask you questions about the Imam. And to begin with, I want to ask you, could you tell us about the background of the Imam, his birth, where he studied, and his life in general?
Okay, alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Waba'd. So alhamdulillah, when discussing this particular Imam, we're going to be looking at Tabaqat al-Hanabila, as well as later sources that cite this and other details. But Tabaqat al-Hanabila, because it's the earliest source on his life, as written by his son Abu Hussein ibn Abi Ya'la. And this is from volume 2, pages 166, and it runs all the way up to 217, because it lists not just him, but all of his students.
MashaAllah.
And his students number more than 60. And there's an enormous amount of detail.
And these students, they are the highest ranking ones, I presume.
Yes, they're the highest ranking ones. And these names, once we start, some of the names will recognize, some that we don't. But once we start talking about their students, we'll understand that these are the most important people of their time, because they shaped the direction of Islam and the direction of fiqh for the rest of the Muslim world. They're some of the most important people.
Excellent.
Now, in looking at Al-Qadi Abu Ya Al-Baghdadi, rahimahullah, the account begins by referring to him as Muhammad ibn al-Husayn ibn Muhammad ibn Khalaf ibn Ahmad ibn Al-Farra Abu Ya'la. So he is Muhammad, the son of Al-Husayn, the son of Muhammad, the son of Khalaf, the son of Ahmad, the son of Al-Farra, and his kunya is Abu Ya'la. Now he is referred to as Kana Alim al-Zamani, the scholar of his era, Farid Asri, the rare one of his time, the most unique and peerless scholar, the sage of his era, and he has a huge footprint in Usul and Furu'. And he has an honorable rank in the religion and the earthly life that cannot be denied. And in addition to this, he has a high and exalted status in the Imamain, in the sight of the two Imams from the Khulafa, Al-Qadir and Al-Qa'im, radiallahu anhumma. وأصحاب الإمام أحمد رضي الله عنه له يتبعون. And the companions of the school of the Imam of Ahmad ibn Hanbal radiallahu anhu, they follow him. وَلِتَصْنِيفِهِ يَدْرُسُونَ وَيُدَرِّسُونَ. And his works, they learn and they teach them. وَبِقَوْلِهِ يَفْتَنُونَ. And they give fatwa by his statement. وَعَلَيْهِ يَعْوَلُونَ. And they depend on him as mu'tamad. وفقهاء على اختلاف مذاهبهم وأصولهم كانوا عنده يجتمعون. And the fiqh scholars in the different madhhabs and their principles, they gather in his presence. ولمقاله يسمعون. And they listen to his statement. ويطيعون. And they obey him. وبه ينتفعون. And they benefit from him. وبالاهتمام به يقتدون. And in terms of his rank and his dignity and his honor, they follow him. وقد شواهد له من الحال ما يغني من المقال. And the amount of people that testify to his state and his fact doesn't even need to be repeated. لا سيما مذهب الإمام أحمد لا سيما مذهب الإمام أبي عبد الله أحمد بن محمد بن حنبل, especially when we talk about the madhab of our Imam Abu Abdullah Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Hanbal. اختلاف الروايات عنه. the different narrations from him, ومما صح لديه منه, and the different aspects that are authentically recorded, مع معرفته بالقرآن وعلومه, not to mention Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la's great knowledge of the Quran and its sciences, والحديث, hadith, والفتاوى, and fatawa, والجدل, and his debate in fiqh, وغير ذلك من العلوم, and other than that from the different science, مع الزهد والورع, as well as zuhud and cautious abstention, والعفة والقناعة, as well as his chastity and good disposition, وانقطاعه عن الدنيا وأهلها, and he abstained from the earthly life and its people that indulge in the earthly life, واشتغاله بالسطر العلمي وبثه, and he busied himself with writing down the knowledge and researching it, وضعته ونشره, as well as looking after the knowledge and spreading it. So this is the introduction of who he is. Okay. Now we talk about his father, who is Al-Hussein. وكان والده أبو عبد الله. His father is Abu Abdullah Al-Hussein. أحد الشهود لحضرة مدينة السلام. He is one of the great witnesses who was in the presence and gatherings of knowledge in Medina al-Salam. This is one of the names for Baghdad. Baghdad is called Qubbatul Islam, the Dome of Islam, Dar al-Islam, because Baghdad was the seat. So not only is dominant rule Muslims Dar al-Islam ruled by the Shah, but Baghdad itself was called Dar al-Islam.
It was the capital
sometimes
of the
called
Khilafah.
Medina. It was there because the Abbasids shifted it.
Right. Okay.
Originally, the Bani Umayyah ruled from Damascus. And so they built the Jami Bani Umayyah. And they built that as an outpost. Wherever they would go, they'd build it. So if you look at the floor plan of the Jami Bani Umayyah and the floor plan of Al-Hamra, they're the exact same, the floor plans. Because the same people built them.
Exactly.
Well, when the Abbasids took over in 132 Hijri, the Bani Umayyah, they fled. The ones that were left that hadn't been killed, because the order was given to kill the ones in Damascus. Abdul Rahman al-Dakhil, he escapes and gets there, and they carry on the Bani Umayyah there in Andalus. When they go to Iraq and they move it, they realized we need a capital, but the capital needs to be more splendorous than Damascus. So they create, building on the foundations of the area of Baghdad, they build up what's called Dar al-Salam, which is supposed to be a rival city. It becomes this monster city, and this huge metropolis. But when it gets destroyed, stuff gets transferred back to Damascus.
Wow.
So it's so interesting how this has happened, because when Baghdad gets destroyed in 656 Hijri, a lot of those scholars, whoever was left, were transferring the knowledge back to Damascus.
Subhanallah. And this Baghdad, when it was it built as a round city?
Yes, it was round. It had 7 gates, and it was meant to be in alignment as well, according to astronomical things and codes, so that way they could measure the summer and winter solstice, the vernal equinox, and all these other things. It was, the Abbasid rulers really wanted to make it something that would draw people there and away from Damascus, because the Abbasids wanted to be the premier attraction. And so for 400 years, that's what it was. His grandfather also attended and had in his gatherings Muhammad ibn Subayr, who was the Qadi of the Khalif of the time, Al-Ta'i Lillah. And during that Khilafah, his grandfather was present there and was among the senior people. Now, at that point, his grandfather was known to avoid public posts and wanted nothing to do with them. Ibn Subayr was qualified for the post of chief Qadi, and that was witnessed by many people. But he wanted nothing, but the grandfather, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, wanted nothing to do with it. He used to teach and go over lessons with Abu Bakr al-Razi, and he was Hanafi in his fiqh, because Abu Bakr al-Razi, although he had issues in his later life, in the beginning of his affair, he was upon right creed. He's one of the few Hanafis that was upon right creed during that time in the Muslim West. Now, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein did not, though, want to be near the government. And when al-Muti' tried to bring him into the government, he fell for like 50 days. And Abu Bakr al-Razi came to visit him during this time when he was laid up at Al-Karh at Al-Jan al-Gharbi. And what happened was he did not recover from that illness. And he died in the year 390 Hijri, which meant he never had to go into the government. But he was a big Hanafi Qadi, his grandfather, his father, was a big Qadi.
This Abu Bakr al-Razi, this is not the Fakhruddin al-Razi, right?
No, this is different.
Okay.
It's different. That's Fakhruddin al-Razi is in Damascus.
Right.
So this Abu Bakr al-Razi is he's a mufassir and also a Qadi and teacher. So he dies in 390 Hijri. And at this time, Abu Ya'la al-Baghdadi, he is 10 years old, which means he was born 380 Hijri. He's also known as Al-Walid al-Sa'id, the fortunate father, not just because he's the father to Ibn Abi Ya'la, but he's considered the father of the ulama of his time and thereafter. So as it carries on, Al-Qadi Abu Ya, he begins going about his business in learning the knowledge. So he goes by studying the Quran, reciting it to his father and others, and he goes to the main pillar in the masjid, in their local masjid, and starts to recite and memorize the Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi and takes that on. Studies it intently and masters it. And so he wants to carry on, and he asks, where do I go to get more of this knowledge? And he's shown to the Shaykh Abu Abdullah ibn Hamid, who at the time was a Shaykh of the Hanbalis. His masjid was at Bab al-Sha'ir, and Abu Ya'la went to him, rahimahullah, and kept his company. So he was in suhbah with him up until the time that he died in 403 Hijri. So Ibn Hamid, rahimahullah, dies in 403 Hijri. But he kept his company up until that time. Ibn Hamid used to spend money on Abu Ya'la and look after him and sponsor him and show goodness to him. And Al-Qadi Abu Ya, rahimahullah, when he was asked what his intent was by Ibn Hamid, he said, my intent is to memorize this madhhab.
MashaAllah.
So that's my intent. And so he carried on. And after he died, he moved on and went to Muhammad ibn Ali al-Muqri. But at that time, he was also preparing in the year 402 to go on Hajj. He wanted to go on Hajj. So he was now a little bit older. And he said, who should I now go to? Now that Ibn Hamid has died, now that this has occurred, what should I do? And so they instructed him to Muhammad ibn Ali al-Muqri. But when he went on Hajj, Al-Qadi Abu Ya, they asked Muhammad ibn Ali al-Muqri, they said, well, where do we study while he's gone? Who do we sit with? Where do we go? He says, the best of who you could study with is this young man here, referring to Al-Qadi Abu Ya. Now, Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah, he had many students and companions, but he spent his most time with Al-Qadi Abu Ya because he somehow saw some good in him. And he realized that Allah would manifest something from him because he could see the good in him. And this he believed was because of a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ittaqu firasatul mu'min. Beware of the firasa, the insight of the believer. فَإِنَّهُ يَنْظُرُ بِنُورِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. Because he examines with the light of Allah Almighty and Majestic, as collected by Imam Tirmidhi. So he saw something in him. Right? He definitely saw something in him. Now, when you look at his way, the Imam Al-Qadi Abu Ya, he started, although his knowledge started with the hifz of the Quran, the first hadith that he ever heard was in the year 385, which means he was 5 years old. That's the first hadith he ever heard. He was born in the year 380 on the 28th of Muharram. So he was born on the 28th of Muharram, 380 Hijri. 5 years old, heard his first hadith. He also began sitting down and listening to Abu al-Hussein al-Sukri from Ahmed ibn Abdul Jabbar al-Sufi, from Yahya ibn Mu'in and others. He also listened to hadith from a group from Al-Baghdadi. Al-Baghdadi narrated through Ahmed ibn Hanbal. He heard from Abu Qasim Musa ibn Isa Siraj from Al-Baghdadi, from Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Ma'ruf from Al-Baghdadi, from Ibn Sa'id, from Abu Dawud, the Sunan, and others. He heard from Abu Qasim Hubaba from Al-Baghdadi, from Ali ibn Ja'ad, from Shu'bah, and others. He heard from Abu Tayyib ibn al-Manar from Al-Baghdadi, from the narrative of Ibn Sa'id, and others. He heard from Abu Tahir al-Mukhallas from the narrative of Al-Baghdadi, from Ibn Sa'id, and others. He heard from Abu Qasim Isa ibn Ali al-Wazir from Al-Baghdadi, and others from that narrative. He heard hadith from Abu Qasim al-Suwaid from Mujahid, from Al-Anbari, and others. He narrated from Abu Qasim al-Saydalani from Ibn Sa'id and others. He learned from al-Fath bint Al-Qadi Abu Bakr Ahmed ibn Kamil, so a female hadith scholar. He also heard from his grandfather, his maternal grandfather, Abu Qasim ibn Hanifa, right? So his maternal grandfather was Hanafi. He heard from Abu Abdullah, from Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Abdul Rahman al-Susi and others. He heard from Abu Muhammad Abdullah ibn Ahmed ibn Malik. He listened to him in transactions, and he also narrated from Ibn Abil Fawadis. He heard from Al-Qadi Abu Muhammad al-Akfani. He heard from Abu Nasr ibn al-Sha'. He heard from Abu Abdullah al-Naysaburi. He heard from Abu al-Hasan al-Hammami and from Abu al-Fath ibn Abil Fawadis. And in Mecca, while he was there in Damascus and Halab, he heard from other people. Now, he actually began authoring works. His first work and his first books started after the death of his Sheikh Ibn Hamid. Now understand this. Ibn Hamid dies, in 403. He's born in 380. So he's already authoring books and teaching. He's 23.
Remarkable.
He made Hajj in the year 414 Hijri. After that, he returned to teaching and authoring books in Furu' and Usul and Adab, and focused his business on that. Now, his son describes his appearance, that when he used to sit down at a place, he was very thin, so he didn't used to leave an indentation on a rug or anything like that. In addition to that, he was known as being slightly short for his time period. So he wasn't a tall man. He was more considered short. He spoke in a low voice. So you had to get really close to listen to him. So his circles were very big, but people often had to repeat because he spoke with a low voice. He wasn't a yeller. He didn't yell and he didn't raise his voice. There were some imams that, they would speak with a very strong and commanding voice. He had a good voice, but he didn't raise it. So if you missed something, you missed it, and it was difficult to dictate from him, right? So you had to listen very carefully. He was always spending his time reflecting or going through some details, going over some texts. He came into the presence of Al-Qadi al-Sharif, as well as Abu Ali ibn Abi Musa a number of times. The first was in Jumad al-Ula in the year 422. And at this point, witness was taken by the chief Qadi, Abu Abdullah ibn Makula, who was a big judge. And he was the son of Al-Qadi Abu Ali ibn al-Qasim, known as Zainuddin. He had a huge amount of followers. People took barakah from him on a daily basis. And when they saw him, Al-Qadi Abu Ya, they commanded him to be leader. They said, you should write a fiqh book, which is Marja language. They said, you should write a fiqh book, everything else. He refused to. He said, I refuse. But they kept pressing him. and they made the people bear witness that he'd been asked and that he should do something about it. Well, during this time, 422, Al-Qadi Abu Ya died on the 11th of the Hijaz of this very year. Then after that, Al-Qadi Abu Ali died 428. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused people to keep asking for people to be brought forward, so the Al-Qadi Abu Ya should be brought forward. They kept repeating these questions. Now, they wanted him to come forward not only as a Marja writer fiqh book, but also to be chief Qadi.
Right.
So the chief Qadi, Abu Abdullah ibn Makula, kept asking for two sheikhs, Abu Mansur ibn Yusuf and Abu Ali ibn Jarrada. But they kept asking Al-Qadi Abu Ya that he should be in their gatherings, that he should write books, that he should do these other things. And they also said, we follow whatever you follow. So they changed madhhab. And they also changed their any theological position. Because remember, I'tizal was strong at this point. Ibn Makula was not, but they had some traces, so they changed over to what he said.
So at this time, the Hanafis there as a majority still Mu'tazila?
Yes. Yes, but there were some that were decent.
Right.
In the West.
Sure.
So they demanded that he should be the head, and they kept asking him for do this, but he didn't like this. He didn't want, but eventually he relented. He said, okay, I'll do it. I will do it, but he disliked it. So this was in the year 428. His Marja'iyah was here now.
MashaAllah.
Ibn Makula respected him greatly, showed him honor and dignity, got up in his presence, and he didn't do anything regarding passing rulings or whatever else without first conferring with him. His son says, the son of Abu Ya says, وَقَدْ كَانَ حَضَرَ الْوَالِدُ السَّعِيدُ قَدَّسَ اللَّهُ رُوحَهُ Aziz rahimahullah. In the year 432, he was in the residence, which is an outer area. في دار الخلافة في أيام القائم بأمر الله. He was in the outer area preaching. And there was a huge gathering of people from the people of knowledge. And one of those in his presence that kept us company was the Shaykh and Zain Abu Hasan Al-Qazwini. And as he was there, this was around the same time that the publication of Ibtal al-Ta'wilat had been completed. And there were a lot of people that were in opposition because the book was an answer to Ibn Furak's statement regarding the Ash'ari and other things. And there were people that said, oh, well, look, the narrations in it, they're wahin. And his response was the da'if and wahin narrations there are because I'm citing what he cited. So they came to Al-Qadi Abu Ya. They sent someone from the Khalifa of the time by the command Al-Qa'im Billah, and they asked him to do something about this. And so he wrote the Mu'tamid fi Usul ad-Din, which was the Mukhtasar of Ibtal al-Ta'wilat. And the Khalifa wrote Al-I'tiqad al-Qadri, which was a summary of these things, right? And so once that happened, the matter started to get resolved because the people that were there were told to sign it. Only a few people did not sign it.
So the Khalifa himself was also a scholar?
No, he was a man that wanted this issue resolved because there were starting to be issues and upheavals. And for him, looking at it as a Khalifa, he wanted the matter resolved. And he said, whatever everyone's upon, that's what I'm upon. Because some of the Abbasids at this time, sometimes some of the Abbasid Khalifas had Shia tendencies. Sometimes they had Batiniya tendencies. Sometimes they had Mu'tazila tendencies. These particular two did not have these tendencies, but they also wanted order.
Yes.
Right? They want order. And we discussed under Ibn al-Jawzi the history of I'tiqad al-Qadri and such. So I want to belabor the point here.
Sure.
Right? So this matter then gets resolved. Now, the first one who signed over on Al-I'tiqad al-Qadri was the Shaykh Zahid al-Qazwini. He said, هذا قول أهل السنة. وهو اعتقادي وعليه اعتمادي. He said, this is indeed the statement of Muslim orthodoxy. It's my creed, and I depend on it. Then after that, Al-Qadi Abu Ya, he signed it over. Then after that, Al-Qadi Abu Al-Tabari signed it over. And all the fuqaha from there, they were in agreement. And those that were not, they abstained. Now, we had during this time that Abu Qasim Abdul Qadir bin Yusuf, after he left from that gathering, he had a dream that night. And in the dream, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تزال طائفة من أمتي على الحق ظاهرين إلى يوم القيامة. There shall always be a group from my ummah upon the truth, dominant until the day of resurrection. That's from Sahih Muslim. When they heard that, Al-Qazwini turned to Al-Qadi Abu Ya and said, what do you say about this? And Al-Qadi Abu Ya said, praise be to Allah. Alhamdulillah ala ma tafaddala bihi min idhar al-haq. Praise be to Allah on how he manifested his slave to manifest the truth. Al-Qazwini even said to him, well, I am not satisfied with this. I want to go into the residence at the central Masjid al-Mansur and to dictate all the ahadith of the sifat. So he went and was present there and gathered all these things together and dictated all the akhbar al-sifat. And it was based upon what had been said by Al-Qadi Abu Ya rahimahullah, what he'd written. But he summarized it and put it all there. Now Al-Qazwini, he died on Sunday night, the 5th of Sha'ban in the year 442. And he was prayed upon and laid to rest. And every alim that was there and present. But there had to be several janazas because there were people from the different madhhabs that were there. And they had their own ahkam and things like this. But they all wanted to get an opportunity to pray upon Al-Qazwini. Now, Al-Qadi Abu Ya, in the year 445, was in the residence in the gathering of Abu Qasim Ali ibn al-Hasan, who was the head of that gathering. And he had a huge amount of people with him, of sheikhs and fuqaha, and people of deen and knowledge. And the head of the gathering, Abu Qasim, on that day, he said, the Quran is the speech of Allah. So this is what he said to clarify that he's upon the same position. Abu Qasim Ali ibn al-Hasan, he said, Al-Quranu kalam Allah. The Quran is the speech of Allah. Wa akhbar al-sifat tumarru kama ja'at. And the akhbar al-sifat are to be passed by just as they came. And at that point, all the groups fell in line. So after that, everything seemed to be in line. Then in that same year, Ibn Makula died. And so now they're looking for a new person to fill his post as chief qadi. And they came to him and asked him, we want you, Al-Qadi Abu Ya, to be the chief qadi. But that would put him under some trial. So Al-Qadi Abu Ya, he set up a series of conditions. And what those conditions, when the Khalifa agreed upon them, what those conditions led to is it led to him accidentally self-abdicating. And it brought the Marja back into power. And by the time he realized what had happened, it's too late. Now, during this time, Al-Qadi Abu Ya engaged in a huge amount of writing and also a huge amount of teaching. And he had an absolutely enormous amount of students that he dictated hadith to, that he dictated fiqh to, and that he dictated creed to. So on the 29th of Dhul Qa'dah in the year 456, it was narrated that Abu Hussein ibn Akhi Mimi He said that it was narrated to us by Abdullah Muhammad Abdul Aziz al-Baghawi, who said it was narrated to us by Abu Ruh Muhammad ibn Ziyad from Farwa al-Baladi, who said it was narrated to us by Abu Shihab from Ismail ibn Abi Khalid, from Qais ibn Abi Hazim, from Jarir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu, who said, we were in the presence of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he looked to the moon on a full moon night, and he said, you shall see your Lord mighty and majestic with the eyes in your head, just as you see this moon without any blurriness in the vision. And if you so choose and no sleep overwhelms you, you should pray before the rising of the sun and before its setting. فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ قَبْلَ طُلُوعِ الشَّمْسِ وَقَبْلَ الْغُرُوبِ. So then the Rasul ﷺ recited, so glorify with praise your Lord before the rising of the sun and before its setting. Surah Qaf, the 50th Surah 39. Al-Qadi Abu Ya said to us, this is a Sahih Hadith that's been collected by Imam Bukhari from Yusuf ibn Musa, from Asim ibn Yusuf al-Barbu'i, from Ibn Shihab. And the way he was reciting it, the narrator said, it's as if he heard it straight from al-Bukhari, because the hadith was so clear and it was so crisp, the way people were dictating it. And so at that point, when people saw that, people started mentioning poetry about Al-Qadi Abu Ya and his rank and what he represented. And they started referring to him as the sheikh of his time, the sheikh of his age. Even those that differed with him did not dispute his leadership and his rank, because he was known for his leadership and rank. He had a tremendous amount of zuhud and was among the strongest of the scholars in his time, simply because of how much he avoided the world. He was known to write poetry. He was known for his taqwa, and he was known for his avoidance of earthly and fleshly affairs. His business was totally centered around the revealed law and was connected to it.